Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cartoon Syndicate. Once again, I am Paul Densmore, and today we're going to do something a little bit different. I thought we've been back in the West. We took a brief sojourn looking at Tezuka when Eastern stuff, and there's more sort of Eastern influences that I want to look at, like Akira Toriyama and some people like that. And I mean, we're going to kind of bounce around. But now that we're back in the West, we've finished up our three-parter on the '90s extreme guys. I wanted us to kind of open up the lens of of the idea, the concept of Western sequential artists and comic artists and illustrators and cartoonists. And we're going to look at my favorite. We're going to look at my favorite European comic artists today, although not necessarily my favorite European comic. Let's see here. Not necessarily my favorite European. Hold on. My favorite European comic. How do I want to say this? Okay, I have two favorite European comic artists, but I like them for different reasons. One is more sequential, and that's what we're going to look at today, and one is more of a pure artist and almost more of an illustrator, although he actually deals more with comics, I would say, than Moebius himself did, because Moebius was kind of all over the place with illustration and design and different things. And I do apologize. It just kind of happened to work out where it's about 5 o'clock where I am, so there is 5 o'clock traffic. And it had been very mellow, but of course, as soon as I started recording, I heard somebody gunning it outside, as they tend to do in my area. So if it gets loud, I apologize. Hopefully there won't be much of that. Of course, everybody waits until I start recording, but that's not their fault, because how could they know? All right. I'm going like I said, I'm going to do something a little bit different today. I'm going to kind of set this up, so please stick with me. I'm going to set it up a little bit. But what we're going to do is we're kind of going to look at the art, but I'm not necessarily going to talk about the art. I'm going to talk about the art in the setup. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go through Moebius in his career set up 18 principles for comic artists, for sequential artists to think of. And I'm not going to read the entire tenet that he set out, but I'm going to read at least the first sentence or two, depending on how long the sentence is and how much we can grasp from the concept. And then I'm going to kind of talk about it, because there are some things, although I agree with all of these, there are some things that I think could have been expanded upon, or I think maybe he was a little too focused in on himself, which is kind of funny because a lot of these tenets are about not being so narrowly focused. But I think in doing so, he also showed how narrowly focused he can be. But that's a human thing. We all do that. We all, unfortunately, at times make broad generalizations. The human mind can't not do it. I mean, or else we would be constantly talking about, I mean, if we wanted to get into general semantics and everything, we would constantly be talking about every single little detail of every single little atom of every single thing that we see. Just like Korzybski, I believe, the founder of general semantics, General Semantics was fond of saying that the map is not the territory. Okay, um, so so in other words, the map is a broad generalization that will give us, the required measurements that we need, but it doesn't have every single blade of grass. It doesn't have every single tree mapped out, every little rock and everything else. Okay, so so again, we can't. We have to hone in on certain things, nor have we experienced everything in the world. And if I seem to be getting a little philosophical, it's probably because we're looking at this book by this other guy, Jodorowsky, who is one of my favorite, not just writers, but one of my favorite minds on the planet. I love his sort of esoteric mind. I actually had, he had a, he writes, he's a therapist in addition to being a writer and a director. A lot of people actually know him more from film than from his comics work. But he also, and he does very symbolic and sort of esoteric work in film, well, in anything that he does. But he's also a therapist, and he has come up with an almost initiatory, esoteric, shamanic sort of approach to therapy. And so it's very interesting, and his ideas are very interesting. So if I seem a little philosophical, it's probably because I'm looking at that name and that's kind of bouncing around in my head. Moebius himself, I mean, from the name that he chose, Moebius, as in like a Moebius strip or Moebius loop. And he actually kind of makes fun of that in these principles. But, I didn't write that down. If you want, you can look up Moebius 18 principles or Moebius advice for artists or Moebius advice for comics artists on Google and find those, and you can read the entire thing. And I believe there was I haven't been able to find it, but I believe William Stout did a running commentary on those 18 principles. So not only do we have, a substantial amount of Moebius going into his own philosophy, but we also have William Stout, another great artist, expanding upon the philosophy with his own philosophy. And so I'm going to kind of do that myself here. Now, I told you I was going to set this up. One of the things that I will set up is the fact that when we look at the art, I want you to realize I kind of came to Moebius I came to Toth, Alex Toth, via Moebius. They both have that economy and that sparseness and that precision. And I would say that Moebius actually has more. Because as we've seen with Toth, he was dealing primarily in black and white, a black and white medium, heavy on both. That sort of chiaroscuro style, where the negative space becomes, it becomes everything. Within Moebius, there's an almost very Eastern philosophy behind it, in that there is a lot of nothing in his panels. And I can already hear people go, and yet there's everything in there. It's funny because he can draw these amazing, gigantic spaceships coming into a planet, and we'll probably see those, or, these futuristic landscapes or any of these scenes. But if you go in and you actually count the amount of lines, there aren't that many. But what there is very, what is there is very precise. It's exactly where it needs to be to convey all the information that you need. Okay? Now, again, there aren't the difference between Moebius and Toth primarily is you will notice there's not much black within Moebius's work. There aren't very many spotted blacks. It's there. There are some, and it's there when it's necessary. But again, it's that whole philosophy of I'm not going to put in what is not absolutely necessary. If it doesn't need to be there, then it's just not going to be there. And that allows a lot of the beauty of the colors to come through, I think. You know, in his mind, it's always, and it's funny because I've seen his work in black and white, and there can be a lot, his black and white illustrations, of course, would be more, you know, there would be more black, but again, not unless it's absolutely necessary, unless it's like a scene at night where everything's going to be very dark. I think one of the first places that I saw Moebius, and I may be wrong, it was probably either in I think he was in All-Star Superman. This would have been about the same time. All-Star Superman, maybe All-Star Batman, I can't remember. And there was a collection of illustrations of the Sandman, of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, of Moebius, the King of Dreams, or just Dream. And and I may bump the camera because this is going to be one of those weird ones where I kind of have to move around a lot. There'll be a lot of moving parts. I'm sorry, because I have my notebook here with my notes and everything I'm actually using notes this time for the 18 principles. So there was this book of illustrations of you know, Dream and his world and the endless and all of that. And Moebius had this very scant illustration. You know, everyone else, a lot of the others had done these very elaborate, dreamlike things where there were tons of tiny little details floating around, and all of these allegorical and symbolic little Easter eggs and everything floating around. And yet Moebius was very simple. It was just, you know, this very simplified, elegant King of Dreams, of Dream, image of Dream, holding like a floating orb in his hand, or a blue flame or something like that. And that was all it was, basically, and a nice background. But everything was scant, and yet it stood out. There wasn't much other than that. It looked like anything that you or I could do, but you or I could not do it to that degree of sort of perfection. It's like you don't need all of the other stuff. And he kind of goes into the philosophies that we're going to be talking about. He kind of goes into that. So I'm going to open to, I've got a section picked out that I think is sort of the coolest. And what I want you to notice is just that scant nature of the art. It's very empty. It's very open. The only thing that's there is what needs to be there. Nothing superficial or artificial or anything else is there. And yet still there is a stylistic approach to it. You know, a cartoonist's eye. All right. Without further ado, let's go ahead and break this open. And again, a lot of moving parts here. I'm going to kind of have to juggle around. And then I'm sorry if I bumped the camera. And then I'm going to, again, really talk about the principles of Moebius. All right? So let's get into this. Principle number 1. When you draw, you must first cleanse yourself of deep feelings like hate, happiness, ambition, etc. This is one of the ones that at first I just completely wanted to disagree with because, as I've said before, part of my whole philosophy is that very Kirby-like essence that if you're not feeling it, no one else is. But so I don't necessarily agree that you have to banish hate. It's, I mean, art itself, drawing, especially comics, or anything to do with it, can be very alchemical and transfigurative and transmutating, etc. So that you can take all of those feelings, you know, and and instead of bottling them up and putting them away, you can unleash them on the page so that you're getting that across, but in a way that's, again, more healthy. You're not just pushing that on the reader. You are allowing it to become something more than it could have possibly been. So in other words, anger can become a kick-ass fight scene or something like that, where, whatever the reader is feeling can also be worked out as he's reading it. He or she is reading it. But the one thing I will agree with is that you should definitely banish ambition. You should never go into anything. And I see too many people are like, and it almost becomes very much to the artist's detriment. And again, my ideals, Moebius's ideals, etc., are not absolutes. You should always find your own path within this, so that what I'm saying isn't necessarily true and what Moebius is saying isn't necessarily true. But they're interesting tenets that you can, play around with and find your own style. Look at this. Count the lines. That's it. How little there really is, and yet how epic it is. All right, so an artist that's crowd surfing basically is, oh, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? Do you think this will work? Do you think this will make money? And if you take that into your art and you're thinking about, oh, I need to sell this. I need to make some bread or whatever. Then that's a very weak feeling in the beginning. That's already a needy feeling. And that neediness comes across, to the reader and to the audience. So avoid that at all if at all possible. That's not necessarily, again, you have to think of your audience to a certain degree. You have to give them the experience that you would want if you're reading it. But don't sit there and try to, as Kurt Vonnegut once said in his advice for writers, one of his tenets was, if you throw open the window and try to make love to the world, you'll do nothing but catch a cold. And I'm paraphrasing there. But that was his advice, was write for one person. I remember that great television host like Bob Ross used to say he didn't have in mind, these thousands and thousands of people watching him. He was talking to one very specific person. So you have to, be satisfied with what you're putting out, and you have to know that hopefully, if you like what you're putting out, then maybe a few others will like it. But you can't try to make something that everyone will like. Okay? I think there was even a Wayne's World thing that said that, Like, what was it? Led Zeppelin didn't write tunes that everybody liked. They left that for the Bee Gees. And that's no slight against the Bee Gees. The Bee Gees have a couple of my favorite songs. Not the disco stuff, but, I think they wrote one of the greatest love songs of all time, but that's neither here nor there. Okay, tenet number 2. It is very important to educate your hand. And this is one that I struggle with myself. But Moebius is able to get this level of precision through having that educated hand, through having that, again, muscle memory and everything connecting so that the hand does exactly what he wants it to do. I've always struggled with that, and it's gotten much better. And oddly enough, mine has gotten much better because I've broken one of the tenets, one of the principles that he will say later, and actually sped up my art, my drawing and sketching time. But, everybody's got to find their own way. But you have to have that. You have to have that in your art. And I think if you look at any of the new videos that Jim Mahfood does of his drawing process, his art seems very imprecise these days compared to like his old style. But if you watch him draw, it's almost as if he has it all mapped out in his head, and it just has to get onto the page. Look at how epic this splash page is. Right here. And again, how little there really is. I mean, that's pretty well detailed. That's almost like EC Comics. Right there. The old Wallywood and everything. But look at how it contrasts with that simple elegance there. Okay, knowledge of perspective is of supreme importance, and that's something that's another thing that I've struggled with, but I am finding my way through it. And I finally found the truth in that sentence. Real drawing books, start by stressing the importance of perspective, and like how if you learn perspective, you can pretty much draw anything. The world is literally open to you when you learn perspective, and perspective is really not that hard. There's 1 point, 2 point, 3 point, and then variations within that where you have multiple, changing, vanishing points. And then, of course, now there's like 5-point perspective, which is curvilinear and was it fisheye perspective. But none of those are that hard. You can even make yourself grids pretty easily for all of that. So perspective shouldn't be a problem. Number 4. That was number 3, by the way. Number 4. Another thing to embrace with attention is the study of the human body. Its anatomy, positions, body types, expressions, constructions, and the differences between people. This is one thing I almost argue with him because he seems to almost break this himself. But all artists do. Look how similar those two women look. Look how similar those two guys look. every artist is going to have a way to draw men and women. But of course, there has to be, within that, there has to be subtle differences. Think of some of the manga artists, like the new, not necessarily good, but kind of assembly line manga artists, where every single woman looks the same, every single man looks the same. Maybe it's just the hairstyle is a little bit different or something, or basically they look exactly the same. They just have different bust size or different hair colors, and other than that, it's completely interchangeable. So again, there is sort of a beginning and an end to it. Like, you can't get away from having similarities because of stylistic and the way that you view the world and the way that your mind hand connection works, but also try to expand upon that as much as possible so that everything doesn't just look the same. Number 5. When you create a story, you can begin it without knowing everything, but you should make notes as you go along regarding the particulars of the world depicted in your story. This is one thing that I almost want to disagree with him on, but again, everybody has different ways of doing it. Think about, it's been said that Robert Crumb didn't start out writing scripts, right? He wouldn't even have a plan. He would just sit down at his art table and, put something in a panel, and then the next panel would, have something, and then he would keep going until, he felt like the story ended. But eventually, I've heard that he started writing out scripts, even simplified scripts, so that he knew, a beginning, middle, and an end, and basically what his game plan was when he sat down to draw. And it's been said that that's when he really felt that his art, that his comics got better. Of course, this was much later in life. But yeah, you have to, as what was it? What's that old Yogi Berra saying, that if you don't know where you're going, you'll never get there. Something like that. He had a whole lot of different variations on that. But you have to have some idea of where you're going, so that when you sit down, you're not going to be overwhelmed, and that's where a lot of blocks come in. And that's another thing I want to say about the hand-mind connection. Try to draw every day, because if you don't, that can wither very quickly. Okay, now it comes back rather quickly as well. Don't worry if you do kind of lose it. If you do take a break, and then you come back and you're like, "Damn, my drawing sucks." It will come back. Don't freak out. You just have to realize that it's just like a physiological thing, that hand-mind connection. And you're just reestablishing that. So it'll just take a little bit of time, and probably less time than you would think. So don't freak out about it. All right. So you don't have to know everything within your story. You still want to be a little bit surprised. You still want to have some wiggle room, so that if you come up with something better, you can work on that. But always try to, have an idea. And you've got to love these spaceships, especially the blimp-like spaceships. There's almost nothing drawn there, and yet they look gorgeous, I mean, what is there is what needs to be there, and nothing else is there. All right. And here we get back into Jodorowsky. Number 6, Alejandro Jodorowsky says, "I don't like drawing dead horses." Well, it is very difficult. Not necessarily a principle, but he expands upon it. Basically, we kind of draw ourselves into ruts. We play to our strengths, and we should. You shouldn't draw something that, especially, professionally, that you're not good at. Find some workaround. But at the same time, you should try to strengthen your weaknesses and practice on those. But also accept where you're at with certain things, and find workarounds. Again, look how little is actually drawn, and yet it's perfect. Number 7, equally important is the clothing of your characters and the style of the material from which it was made. So again, that's that thing I was talking about with Tezuka, and I almost take issue with him because so many of his clothing, it doesn't look, what material is that? Who can know? There's no texture there. We can know that that's sort of a plastic or maybe metallic-like, but again, we're not 100% sure there. But texturally, having that precision of textures is very important. Like down here, we know that is a very shiny, reflective floor just because of those few little lines casting a shadow there, And that's all that's necessarily needed. You don't always have to go into, again, that's that whole thing with, Liefeld or McFarlane. It's like finding that right balance for yourself between too much and too little. And here is an interesting one that kind of expands upon that. Number 8, the stylistic continuity of an artist and its public presentation are full of symbols. They can be read just like a tarot deck. Okay? And coming back to Jodorowsky, I was going to mention I used to have one of his tarot decks that's not, it's not his. It wasn't, it's an old, he managed to put together this deck that was long thought to be extinct, but through through a series of synchronicities, was able to find all the various pieces to put it back together. And it's a very interesting, very simple, very simplified art that has this very enigmatic quality to it. And that was kind of the beauty of it, almost as an objet d'art. But again, it's like we can look at a Liefeld piece and all the little stippling and everything, and we can know that that's Liefeld. We can look at McFarlane and all the different hatching and the shark's teeth and everything like that on the edge of spotted blacks and things like that. And we can know that's a McFarlane piece. Or we can know that someone was influenced by those. We can look back at it. Of course, they got it from other places as well. But you can look at these little stylistic details as symbolism and almost what is going on inside of a person's, in other words, their style is almost reflective of themselves. It's almost like a business card for artists. Number 9, when an artist, and this is one that I highly disagree with on 2 levels, when an artist, a real working artist, goes out on the street, he does not see things the same way as normal people, and he actually put normal in quotes. So he almost knew, it's almost like he knew he was being pretentious, so quote unquote normal people. Number 1, I think I may have mentioned before in these videos that one of the co-founders of neurolinguistics programming said that everyone sees the world completely differently, that it would be more psychedelic than any drug that you could ever take if you were to simply see the world through, the person sitting next to you, through their eyes. And I agree with that. And then the other thing is that quote unquote normal people. One of my mentors, Robert Anton Wilson, actually went and developed a whole pseudonym on to expand upon the idea that there is nothing that's normal. He's like, I never saw a normal sunset. I never saw a normal, I never saw a normal rainbow. I've never met a quote unquote normal human being. We all have our quirks and idiosyncrasies and everything else. So, but again, yeah, everyone will see the world differently, artist or not. And these are just some beautiful, I love the use of color in these. And we're going to talk about color in a second. Number 10, another important element is composition. And I can't stress this enough. Look how this is not in the center. Again, it kind of follows that rule of thirds, not 100%, like the eyes are a little bit below, but there, in the background, boom, boom, boom. Nothing is really ever centrally located. It's almost slightly off. Like the center can be like between two different things. The center is like that space there, and you've got everything else circling around it. Look at this splash page. Find the center. There. Everything's leading towards the center, but nothing is in the center. I think that's brilliant. So yeah, composition, vastly important for artists to learn. I think that really kind of separates the really good artist from, the sort of mundane artist, is an appreciation of composition. Number 11, the narration must harmonize with the drawings. So he goes on and expands on that it's almost the rhythm and the cadence of the word balloons and everything must match up with the timing that you've chosen. Again, to think of things cinematically is good to one point, but also bad to one point, because you don't have the luxury of milliseconds. You have to choose this moment, and it has to harmonize with the narration and the story and the exposition and everything. All right, and that's something that we can look at Will Eisner again and kind of study on that. This is one where I almost want to say, fuck you, Moebius. Number 12, but I can understand where it's coming from. Beware of the devastating influence of North American comic books. So, I think that's almost the very pretentious French idea coming through, like, fuck the Americans, But at the same time, and oddly enough, when he goes on in it, he doesn't get down on American. In several of the other ones, he gets very down on Americans, but he goes in on this principle right here. There are very few people. This is almost very Kirby-ish, when everybody is having their own experience, Every character is having their own experience. And he's actually getting down on Mexican comic book artists, of all things. And how it's very flash, and it's almost sort of like a luchador experience. Where it's very much the flash and the bang and the action and in your face and aggressive. Of course, a lot of things have that. But what I would completely agree with him on is the fact that we all have to get outside of our heads. I mean, it's so easy for, you know, to become engrossed with the culture that you're naturally engrossed in, and forget about some of the other principles. This is so much like that is almost straight out of Lucas, out of Star Wars, like the Jawas coming up, and there's nothing wrong with that. Again, it's that cinematic approach to things. So, getting outside, learning different principles, learning different techniques, studying artists way outside your kind of circle of influence. Number 13, there is a connection between music and drawing. Again, there is a harmony, a cadence to it, and it all has to flow and it all has to harmonize between, text, visual, panel, composition, page, flow, everything else has to boogie. Number 14, and here's a good one. Color is a language that the graphic artist uses to manipulate his reader's attention as well as to create beauty. So look at this, look at this compared to this. There is a natural tone that matches the emotion that we're supposed to be convey, that the artist is trying to convey. I remember I kind of got into that when I was in my coloring class in the sequential art department, coloring comics. And I remember one time I did a Mignola. I colored a Mignola page from Hellboy. Very kind of similar to this, and was really going deep into color theory. And I remember one of the very pretentious guys that was like, "Marvel is the way. Anything outside of Marvel, fuck." And actually said, he was looking at the art and he said, even though she said who it was, he couldn't get it through his head that, like, I don't think he knew anyone existed outside of himself in that class. That's kind of the nature of this guy. But he said, if someone colored my art like this, I would kick their ass. And it was very much like this. And really couldn't go into it. He was just like, I don't know. I just hate it. And so, again, we all have our different perspective. So it's, getting outside of our head. Again, color is another option to use. And this is very similar to that Moebius thing from the Sandman that I was telling you about, that I was introduced to Moebius. Almost 100% the same. All right, moving on. Let's try to wrap these up. We're already going pretty far. 15, at the beginning of an artist's career, he should principally involve himself in the creation of very high quality short stories. And I 100% about that, agree with that, because I've noticed that it's hard to stay motivated on longer projects, especially when you're doing your own stuff, because it's easy for me to crank out a page. It's easy for me to crank out a 2-page story. Working on this 16-page story, there's so much that's going on, as I showed you. Even though 16 pages is really not much, there's so much going on. And, my cadence has been, 2 pages here and there, that it's almost already like a marathon. And then I also have a graphic novel in the works. And it's like, man, you've got to build yourself up as you go. Don't just try to go from 0 to 180-page story, although everybody's different. So maybe you can do it, maybe not, I don't know, but that's good advice. 16, there are times when we knowingly head down. I love this is good life advice, and I'm not going to say anything else about it. 16, there are times when we knowingly head down a path of failure, choosing the wrong theme or subject for for our capabilities, or choosing a project that is too large or an unsuitable technique. If this happens, you must not complain later. Enough said. Don't complain. Just accept that sometimes failure happens, you know, and move on. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off, move on. Number 17. When new work has been sent to an editor and it receives a rejection, you should always ask for and try to discover the reasons for the rejection. This is one thing they used to teach us at SCAD. Is always get feedback if you can. And this is one of the things that McFarlane used to say. Remember, he's talked about many times about receiving like 2,000 rejections, maybe more, you know, and we think of McFarlane as the ultimate these days. Jim Lee was the same. But McFarlane talks about how he kept going and going and going. And of course, naturally, if you keep drawing and drawing and drawing, you'll get better. So eventually he got good enough where he started getting feedback. Like, we're not going to buy this and you're not going to work for us right now, but we see potential in you. So, you know, here's some feedback on what you're doing. And he started incorporating that feedback into his art. So that not only from just doing more and constantly doing, but also learning from, you know, people who knew what the reader wanted, he was able to get better and better and better. Number 18, now it is possible to expose our works to readers in every part of the planet. All right, and we'll end here. So basically what he's saying again is we're on a worldwide readership now. We have to expand. And he goes into this, like, you have to do the thing that you want to do, but you have to realize that, you know, but you have to have studied enough from a vast enough perspective to know that certain things might work for certain people, but not for them. And so that in your repertoire of just what's naturally in your head, you have enough that you can openly communicate with the world. But again, you shouldn't sit down and go like, oh, I'm going to make something that everybody likes. You should make something that you like, but you should be vast enough and open enough that you know, can connect to, hopefully, a larger and larger audience. And with that being said, we're going to end it there. We're almost approaching 50 minutes. So I very much appreciate your time, your patience. Again, if you like what I'm dropping, please, you know, like and subscribe to the channel. And thank you very much. On to the next one.